To further explain and discuss the complicated structure of the Synod on synodality, we're joined by our panel of experts. Moral theologian Dr. Pia de Solenni, EWTN News Editorial Director Dr. Matthew Bunson, and with insights into the Catholic Church throughout Latin America, EWTN Noticias anchor Edy Rodriguez Morel, who is based in our Lima, Peru office. Thank you so much for joining us. Matthew, let's go to you. Talk to us about the history of synods. What are synods supposed to do in the Latin Church, in the church that is governed by the dicasteries and our Holy Father in Rome?
Yeah, well, historically, synods have been a part of the life of the Latin Church. The modern era, however, has seen, I think, the fullest expression of what the Second Vatican Council was hoping, and that was to have a deliberative body of bishops who would come together on a regular basis to assist the Pope on key issues facing us. The Synod of Bishops was, as we know it today, was established in 1965 by Pope St. Paul VI at the very start of the last session of the Second Vatican Council because he considered it so important for the future of the Church in the modern world. Different popes have used the synods in different ways. There are three types. We have the ordinary, that's the one that's going to be taking place in October. Then we also have the extraordinary synods that have been used, for example, by Pope John Paul II on the 20th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council to steer the interpretation and understanding of the Council. And then there are special synods largely focused on regional concerns, as we saw in 2019 with the Pan-Amazonian Synod. So it's really up to different popes and their priorities.
Now, Pia, as a theologian, you've heard that some people are concerned about the Synod. Let's listen to what Bishop John Paprocki told me in California.
My fear is that people misunderstand what a synod is, that they think it's some sort of a parliament, you know, where people vote and it's like Congress or a legislature and they pass bills and then the bishop is like either a governor or a constitutional monarch.
What kind of an impact do synods traditionally have on what we believe it is and how we act as church?
You know, that's been such a far-ranging experience, Montse. I think Matthew is right to point to Familiaris Consortio from St. John Paul II. I mean, that really shaped the direction and the emphasis of our theology of marriage and of the family. But more recently, what's happening is that many of the synods are focusing on hot-button issues. And so then, you know, to paraphrase Pope Benedict, these things we have the real synod and we have the synod of the media. And so what happens is people are hearing the headlines and it's the clickbait, it's what's controversial. And so I think this is what's causing a lot of the confusion. And this is why people are concerned. And at the end of the day, people are also concerned because these hot button issues, traditionally, we discuss those in academic circles. We pummeled each other in academic circles and until we hammered it out and figured it out and moved forward. And the way that the synod works is that typically each participant does a 3 to 5 minute intervention. So there's not a whole lot of time to really probe these ideas. And meanwhile, the ordinary Catholic, however you want to describe them, you know, if you want to describe them by their political affiliation or whatever, they're seeing situations in the parish, the day-to-day life, and they're wondering, how do we address that? Because what's happening at the synod is very high level, at least apparently, and people don't understand, where do I go to when I have concerns just about what's happening in my parish or what's not happening in my parish? So I think there's just a ton of confusion. And again, not understanding that this is a consultative body, meaning this body offers an opinion to the Holy Father, and the Holy Father can do what he wants with that opinion. It doesn't mean that he's forced to act in any way. It doesn't mean that a particular teaching is emphasized or changed or de-emphasized. It is a consultative body, and that's it.
That's interesting. Edy, you have been covering the synod and will be joining us in Rome. What makes this synod then different?
Well, I mean, the makeup is something that's striking at first, right? The fact that there are so many non-bishops who actually have voting rights. But if we go to, I mean, I think what's most essential is the track record of those who have been invited by Rome to participate in this synod. And that's where you find, I think, the real preoccupation. The fact that, as they say, personnel is policy. So if you invite people who have a track record, for example, of LGBT normalizing activism, as does Cristina Hinojosa Sanz from Spain, who has also written against the Catholic doctrine on the sacraments. It's just that we have to rethink all of the Church's sacramental practice. Women's ordination is something she argues for. She says it's not a theological issue. This is what she says. So there are people who you look at it and you say, man, these people don't seem to really be very, very competent, I mean, theologically. And it's something like the bull in the china shop. And this bull is really, I mean, he doesn't like the moral china. He's just going against it with all of these presuppositions that are more characteristic of a worldly mindset than of the mindset of the church. And you wonder why people like Cristina Hinojez Sanz, why James Martin, in the United States is an LGBT activist. Why are they invited specifically to participate? Why do we want that voice to be heard within the Synod deliberations?
That's right, and we do know that we have some voices on the other side that were also invited, Cardinal Mueller, so it really is a moment to get the popcorn out and listen. Matthew, under Pope Francis's now 10-year pontificate, quickly, has there ever been a traditional Synod of Bishops, or did he make this change right away?
No, he has maintained most of the structure of the Synod of Bishops that he inherited from Paul VI, John Paul II, and Pope Benedict XVI. He began, however, making some fairly significant changes around 2015. We look at that as the 50th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council, when he really began talking extensively about synodality and desiring a synodal church. The other big change came just a few years later in a document called Episcopalis Communio, in which he really reconfigured in some ways the potential authority of the Synod of Bishops. And we have seen since then an expansion of participation, culminating really with this Synod on Synodality over this 2-year process. And as Edy notes, the variety and wide diversity of participation is pretty unprecedented in the history of synods. However, it is still about 73% of the voting members are bishops, so it has still a very heavy episcopal orientation.
But it's still new and different. Edy, quickly, Bishop Andrew Cousins brought up Germany and the German Synod when I interviewed him. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We're all aware of what's going on in Germany, and we're even aware of what the Holy Father has said. He doesn't like what's going on in Germany in terms of the German Synod. And we're aware that there are people who have an agenda that's not the agenda of the gospel, right? And so the fear, of course, that those people would try to influence the church in some unhealthy way. For me, I really trust the Holy Spirit, and I think the Holy Father does too.
With the Holy Father denouncing this process in Germany, is there still a possibility of that synod influencing the one in Rome?
Oh, it already has. I mean, it has become like a blueprint for the more progressive, let's say, elements that have been invited within the Synod. They actually, Cristina Hinojez Sanz, once again, she praises what's happening in Germany as something that really is like exemplary for the church and how the church should see synodal processes.
Well, Pia, Edy explained that lay participation and lay voting is new. A theologian in Chicago, Father Louis Camelli, just this week said that we should consider not having votes at all. Why is the idea of lay people voting so confusing?
Again, this is something very new, so it takes us a while to wrap our heads around it. And it's understanding this is not a democratic process. This is a consultative process. So honestly, I'm okay with it because at the end of the day, the vote is fairly, it's subjective. It's not going to determine the course of the church. The Holy Father still is the Holy Father, and he is not governed by the Synod. So I do think it's a gesture. I think it's a symbolic gesture because, again, we're talking about a consultative body, but this is something new, and so it's going to take a while for us to wrap our heads around it. And, to Edy's point, it's kind of confusing for people because we're looking at the participants, who's participating. And then I go back to the fact that most of the Catholics that I hear from are concerned with things that are much more immediate in their families, in their parish life, in their communities. And they're wondering, okay, well, if we can't talk about this at the Synod, or if we don't have a voice at the Synod, then where do we go? Who do we talk to?
And for women who are voting and participating for the first time, does this create confusion for us too?
I don't think it has to. I think this is, it's important to have these different voices in the church heard. And honestly, I mean, sometimes I look at some of the messes that we've had in the church and I think, wow, healthy, well-formed, educated women would do well in some of these positions. And I think we have to be careful, following the example of Cardinal Pell, he used lay experts, women. His deputy was a woman, and he would often send her to meetings in his place. So we have to separate the sacramental, the governance of the sacraments, from the managerial. And the managerial part, I don't have a problem with lay people being involved. And in many cases, I think we should be exploring how lay people can take even a greater role, simply because our presbyterate, our bishops, our priests are so overwhelmed, so taxed. that many of them get drawn away from the governance of the sacraments, which that's their primary responsibility. And they're being tasked with all these mundane worldly situations for which most of them were never trained. So to me, a perfect collaboration here of the lay and clerical, or the lay and the presbyterate, is to include lay expertise.
The disconnect between the theological discussions that usually happen behind closed doors and the practical applications to our lives. Thank you so much for this. We're looking forward to our coverage from the Vatican the last week of October. Thank you all.